Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me this afternoon for this webinar on preparing for your remote audits. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. You should all be able to hear me. Hopefully you can. In your section, on your control panel on your screen, there's a little section there to ask questions. I don't need everyone to do it, but if someone could just give me a quick okay, just so I know that everyone can hear me, and then we can push forward. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. I can see lots of okay, so that's good. Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so like I say, thanks for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to spend a quick half hour, 40 minutes or so, just running through the idea, kind of preparing for your a remote audit with us at NQA. Now, just a bit of a housekeeping. Obviously, this session is being recorded. Okay, you'll get copies of the slides afterwards as well. So please feel free to take notes as you go along, but you will get a copy of the presentation to refer back to once it's ended. Okay. Now, there will be opportunities to ask questions at the end. I won't answer as we go along because obviously it will interrupt the flow. But again, where those of you have been typing in so far, on your screen, there's an option there to ask questions. At the end, I'll kind of review those and field as many answers as I possibly can. But failing that, obviously, you can contact the office and come back to us on any questions that you may have about the remote auditing process. Anyone within the office or your auditor will be able to help you on that. So we're going to kick off then. So we'll begin the webinar, just run through. A little bit just on NQA in the first instance. For those of you that don't know who we are, I imagine there's quite a few clients here today, but obviously for those of you that don't know who we are, on your screen is just a little bit about NQA, where we operate and kind of the size and shape that we are. So I won't go into detail on that because that you can say you'll get a copy of that anyway. But okay, we've also got our promises with regards to experience, obviously indicating there our net promoter score and so on and so forth. So again, feel free to peruse this at your leisure. Once the webinar's ended, you have a copy of the slides to run through that, and anyone in the office will be more than happy to answer any questions that you've got on that. Okay. So just so you know who this faceless person is that's talking to you this afternoon, that's me on the screen. My name is Martin Graham. I am the training manager and also a lead field auditor at NQA. I've been auditing now for, well, I think this year will be coming up my 19th or 20th year, something like that. Feels a lot longer, but yeah, I cover obviously quality, environmental, health and safety, energy management, and also the SSRP scheme as well. Like I say, that's who I am. So got a good industry knowledge of kind of auditing. Also, the last 12 months has been an eye opener for all of us. But that's who I am. Okay. So what we're going to be doing today is just the idea of this webinar is aimed to help you prepare for your remote audit with NQA, just kind of supporting some of the processes and ideas that you might want to take into consideration, obviously because it's an unusual thing for for the industry and you no doubt as well. So hopefully some of the things we're going to talk about will be of value to you. Okay. So just starting off at the very beginning then, okay, a remote audit then. It sounds fairly self-explanatory, but we'll just have a couple of points on what a remote audit actually is, okay. For all intents and purposes, it's a normal audit, essentially. It is undertaken using a suitable ICT platform, okay, and ICT being information communication technology. So obviously that would be something like obviously Zoom or Teams or something like that, I guess we're all familiar with, okay. So a remote audit is one that is conducted partially or completely off-site, and the audit will cover everything that is usually covered on-site, but uses technology to support the auditor when a site visit is not possible or appropriate. And obviously the situation that we're in, well, in this country and globally at the moment is not allowing or permitting site visits as they would happen with audits. So on that basis then we're using basically IT, computers, laptops, phones, whatever it may be, to undertake an audit where we'd normally come to site. Essentially, all other aspects of the audit remain the same in terms of the reporting, the grading of findings, the questions we may ask, and so on. All that's changing is how we're extracting that information. Okay. So like it says there may be use of emails, phone calls, screen sharing, videos and photographs, whatever means necessary to get that kind of information through to the auditor in as practical way as possible. Okay, and we'll come on to that a little bit more as time goes on through this webinar. The scope of the audit remains the same, so that is to say the scope as in your certification and your activities and indeed the standards. So if it's just 9001 or 14 or 45, whatever the scope of the audit is and the criteria, that remains the same. The only thing that's changed is the mechanism for obtaining the audit evidence that we need to as part of our audit process. Okay. Duration may change. Obviously, in terms of duration, it may be kind of, a case of some time may be deferred to allow for a site visit further down the line. So, for example, if there's particular activities that you perform as an organisation, maybe, for example, construction is probably a typical one, it might not be entirely practical or effective to undertake a remote audit fully. So we may do kind of a percentage of the audit off-site remotely, and then defer a period of time to later in the year once things have hopefully got when returned to a degree of normality. But obviously that will be discussed on a case-by-case basis. If the audit can be completed in its entirety remotely, that's ideal for everyone because it keeps the situation as it needs to be for all of us. Fundamentally, the purpose remains the same. That is to obviously the objective of the audit to assess your management system and keep you certified as a client. That remains the same. Obviously, we will support you through that process. It's unusual times for everyone, but we put our pragmatic hats on and we'll support and engage with you to the degree that we need to. Okay. So what can be expected then? Like I've already said, the remote audit will typically be the same duration as your on-site audit unless there's a deferred period of time, but that will be discussed during the audit with your auditor and with the office as need be. So it's not something you necessarily need to worry about at this moment in time. That can be discussed with your individual auditor based upon your circumstances. Obviously, as with any audit, you'll need to be available at all times. You don't need to give a full and undivided attention 100% of the time, but as with any audit. But obviously, you do need to be available to be able to kind of respond and answer to questions and kind of essentially lead and give the auditor the direction that they need to allocate the right people and provide the information. Okay. You can obviously dial into a conference call if you're using Teams or Zoom or something like that. It's always good practice to kind of just remain on the call for the duration because it allows for that kind of interaction as much as anything else. Don't need, like I say, doesn't need to be a full and undivided attention, but just to be available as and when it's needed will be required. Okay. From my own experience and having done this now since kind of March of last year, remote audits are best delivered using screen share. Okay, so because obviously you can talk about the information that you're seeing on the screen, you can ask the questions directly in kind of real time. So we're finding that's a very effective way of doing it. Now I realise obviously it may not be entirely practical for all of you, but when you can support that in the instance, it gives that good indication rather than just a bank of email information being emailed over. If you can talk through a process in real time, that's a good way of doing it. Okay. You may also ask to be emailed documents for this has to review. Obviously, we used email there, but there's a number of ways of transferring information nowadays. You've got kind of SharePoints and WeTransfer and all kinds of things, means of Dropbox and so on. Any means of transmitting information. Obviously, like it says there, any information that you do send will be managed in accordance with our confidentiality and data privacy policies. Okay, and they're all available on the website. Now, the same, obviously, when you're having opening meetings during an audit, you would have been told about our confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements. So basically, all the information that we see here, same as if we were on site, but remains entirely confidential. That won't be exposed to any third party other than our governing body, who is UCAS. Okay. So that's kind of the broad kind of what an audit is and what to expect. Hopefully that's what you're expecting. So just going to run through now some of the ideas, things to take into consideration as part of the preparation for a remote audit. Okay, so this is based upon industry experience and feedback, my own personal experience, having done a broad range of audits over the last 10 months or so in a number of sectors. Okay, so this is some of the things that we're going to feed back to you now and hopefully be of value. Okay. So kicking straight off the bat, then obviously one of the fundamental things to decide on is kind of which platform you're going to use. There's any number of things available nowadays, like it's a few listed there, not exhaustive. You've obviously got Teams, Skype, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Google, whatever it may be. Okay, we've been using Teams an awful lot here at NQA, and I found that during my own audits that's working very well. It's a very stable platform and works well. It allows for multiple layers of interaction with the organisation, including, by the way, like site tours and that kind of thing. It can work very well. I'll come on to that in a short while. But nonetheless, You need to, okay, that doesn't suit you, that's absolutely fine. We'll work along with you in whatever platform suits you best. If you're very familiar with Zoom and comfortable with that, no problem. We'll work along with that with you. It's whatever one is best for most effective for all of us. Okay. Need to, as with any audit, the second point there, what resources will need to be available for the audit and when. Okay, so are people around at home? Are they still at the premises? Your premises working away? So who needs to be available and when? It's just make sure those people, as with any audit, just build that into the plan. Make sure the right people are available for the conversations as they need be. Are the resources familiar with the technology? Hopefully, obviously, we're a little bit further into it than we were in the early part of last year. So there's no, I think we're all generally more familiar with information communication technology than we were. But obviously, if not, if people need training on it and need to be made aware of the platform and how it works, get under your belt before the audit, so people kind of know what buttons to press and so on and so forth. Okay. Need to decide as well, along with your auditor there, as part of the planning process, what areas it's practical to audit remotely. Some things obviously realise some activity may be reduced or not happening at all. So you just need to liaise with your auditor or the NQA office or whoever it may be, just to liaise on them and say, look, okay, this is what you can and can't see, or you're able and unable to see, and so on, and get that kind of decided and prepared beforehand. You don't want to leave it till the last minute and then discover that something can't be audited, because it can cause a few problems. Like it says here, do you need to confirm any information security arrangements? We've mentioned there, obviously, we've got our own data protection and confidentiality, but obviously, if you're sharing information with regards to employees or contracts or whatever it may be, you're well within your rights to say, look, okay, this is confidential, I can only screen share, or it can limit it to the degree that you feel comfortable with. Okay, so some points to consider there. Okay. So a few more things to consider then. Okay, so as you would expect, remote auditing is heavily reliant and almost entirely reliant upon ICT. Okay, so just to expand on that, because it is the main obviously concern when it comes to remote auditing. So a few simple logistical points to take into account in order to be ready for that. Okay, so system which will allow an online conference call, like we've already said there, with video where possible. It's always nice. You can do things over the phone, absolutely, that you can have phone conversations with people and interviews. But I found through my own experience that to have kind of a face-to-face, in some sense of the word, interview with someone, just even if it's just for the opening meetings and at various stages, have that kind of face-to-face contact, that interaction, because it just enables that kind of human factor to come into it, to be retained. Okay, so that's a good way of make sure you've got that platform available. Okay, if you don't have access to it, obviously we can facilitate that via Teams. We can, even if you've not got Teams installed on your system, it doesn't matter, because obviously as long as you've got Microsoft, you're running a Microsoft system, which most of the world is to some degree, we can send you an invite and you'll be able to just join that. So it's a relatively straightforward process. So I'll send you an invitation for the time and the date, and all you need to do is a very simple link process. You can just join the link, and that your auditor will talk you through that. Okay. If online connectivity is not possible, or not entirely practical for the entire duration, we may ask for information to be sent via email. We may follow that information up with a telephone call just to clarify any points and information that's been sent through. But whatever way of communicating, we'll make sure that it's consistent, that it's happy with for you, the client. You're happy enough to do it in that way. But obviously, video conferencing is always good, because it just it allows you to interact as reasonably normally. Okay, and like it says there, please ensure you're familiar with the technology prior to the audit and to avoid unnecessary delays, because it can cause a few headaches. So just to carry on then, so documentation, as with any audit, it's about seeing objective evidence. Okay, and like we said earlier, the only real difference between a remote audit and an on-site audit is the way we obtain that information. Okay, and an awful lot of the time that information is documented. Okay, so documentation will inevitably be requested. If you've been subject to an audit before, then hopefully the requirements are well practiced. So if you're familiar with the auditor and the kind of information that's going to be presented or be required, there's nothing more preparing that, kind of like as you would normally, all the audit evidence that you normally have, compile that, have it ready for the day, because there's going to be things that you will always be asked for, such as internal audits and management reviews and your quality policy and objectives and so on. All these kinds of things that are kind of, if you like, bread and butter to an audit. Okay, so you can prepare that information and make sure that it's available to hand. Okay. Obviously, if it is your first time, such as an initial assessment or to a new standard, yep, feel free absolutely to have your liaise with your auditor directly before the audit. There's nothing wrong with communicating before to clarify what information do you need to see and what's the best way of transmitting it. You don't need to wait until the day for those topics to be discussed. Okay. Like it says there, collating these prior to the audit date and understanding where to obtain the audit information is good preparation activity. So just make sure you know where to go, you've got the right people and when and so on and so forth. And like it says, that equally is important and more important than anything else, relax. Yes, it is an audit. I know kind of it's got a bit of stigma attached to it, but if we're coming back to you as an auditor, we've been to you before, we know how you work. We're all in a similar boat here. We're kind of trying to make something work and be as pragmatic as possible. Okay, and fundamentally, we're here to help you maintain your management system, obviously, in your certification through this particular period that we're going through. This is important to us as it is to you. Okay, and obviously we want to work with you to make sure that's as successful as possible. One thing that I do from my own personal experience is, like it says there, take breaks as you would normally. If you get a coffee, step away from the desk. You don't need to be sitting behind the screen for full 8 hours. It can't be good for anyone. But so have the breaks, have the comfort breaks. But at the same time, make sure you maintain that communication with your auditor, just so that it's they can ask the questions they need to. Okay. So a few more things to consider then. Okay, so confirm, like we mentioned earlier, about making sure the right people are available. Confirm the availability of relevant personnel. So, for example, if there's management need to be involved, health and safety representatives, particular process or procedural owners, make sure they're available. As part of your planning process with your auditor. They'll send through the areas they want to look at. But as with any audit plan, feel free to adjust it and say they're available then or in the afternoon or 2 o'clock, whatever it may be, and you can really bottom down and make it as efficient as possible, because obviously in this instance, it's not going to be quite as straightforward as getting up from a desk and walking down to a production area or to a different department. The people may be working from home, so you need to make sure that they are available. They know that the auditor is going to be wanting to speak to them and so on and so forth. So really get your head around that whole logistics, the arrangements of it. Okay, and likewise, make sure they have access to the relevant information. For example, if someone is working from home and the information is held on site, it's and it's not obtainable, that can cause problems as well. So if the person you're talking to, make sure they're made aware of what typical information that will need to be seen and evidenced throughout the audit. Okay. Just establish how you're going to review the records, screen sharing, scanned documents, job files, whatever it may be, screenshots, videos, site walkarounds, that kind of thing. There's all different ways of obtaining the information during the audit. None of them are wrong. It's just that as long as the information is obtained, in a timely manner as possible, then that's all we need to say. Okay. Critical part there is to plan and communicate, absolutely, especially if there's an audit team. So if there's more than one auditor or more than two people involved in the audit, which there invariably is, make sure who needs to be available and when, and just communicate and keep everyone's in the loop, so to speak. And confirm obviously what the objective of the audit is and agree that it can be achieved. Make sure that you're happy with the auditor, what you're trying to see, what you're trying to achieve, and kind of if there's things like site visits need to be undertaken and so on and so forth. There's nothing wrong with arranging all that and confirming it before the audit. But we can, with all this, we'll work along with you and make sure that it can be as successful as possible. So just to focus on a couple of those points then. So personnel then, okay. So the person or persons responsible will need to be available for the entirety of the audit as a point of contact, same as with on-site. So like I say, don't need full and undivided attention for the duration, but good to have that. Make sure you've got that point of contact. Make sure there's contingencies in place, such as you've got each other's phone numbers and things like that. So if the ICT fails, you can still maintain contact, and simple things like that. Just making sure there's a means of communication between you and the auditor. Okay. Key personnel need to be available for the relevant parts of the audit. Okay, they can dial in separately or from the same point as other personnel where possible. I know sometimes when I'm doing the audits and I set them up, there's like a master, if you like, meeting set off at the beginning for the opening meeting, and then people can jump in and out of that as need be. Okay, so it's or you can do individual meetings, whatever suits you best. It's there's no, like I say, there's no right or wrong way of doing this. It's just whatever suits you and the auditor best. Okay, leadership individuals need to be available during the leadership part, as with any audit, okay, as well as the opening and closing meetings. So that side of it hasn't changed. We'll always aim to have an opening, closing meeting, catch-ups at various points and regularly throughout the day. So it's not going to be a case of have a quick opening meeting, see you at 5 o'clock kind of thing. It's there should be a communication maintained, and feel free to kind of request catch-ups and the level of engagement as you normally would during an on-site audit. Okay. So just onto a bit of documentation then. Okay. So some of the approach, obviously, we'll do our very level best to review as much of the system as possible remotely. Okay. So that can be, like I've already said, you can screen share, you can obviously send via email, like I said, Dropbox, WeTransfer, whatever it may be. Now it's just a case of getting that information over to us. Okay. Unfortunately, ICT nowadays does facilitate that fairly well. Okay. Be aware of information security processes, like we mentioned. Obviously, we've got our own policy, but be aware of your own internal policies in that regard, if there are any, just to make sure that you're working in line with those. Have there been any changes since your last visit? Which to some degree there may have been, obviously taking into account the situation that we're going through. If there's been any significant changes, kind of highlight those, discuss those at the closing meeting. Nothing wrong with explaining to the auditor, kind of the changes that have happened. This is the way we're working now, because obviously working practices will likely have changed, particularly when it comes to health and safety and so on. So feel free to kind of have those conversations. Say, okay, this is what you saw previously, but this is how we're working now, and highlight any changes within the documentation. And last but not least, absolutely, yeah, be prepared to talk through documents and processes as you would during an on-site audit. It hasn't changed. To say ISO 9001 hasn't changed, 14001 hasn't changed. The accreditation standard that we're accredited to, it hasn't changed. So fundamentally, the process is the same. The kind of questions that we're going to ask, the information that we need to see hasn't changed. Like I say, I've said it before, but it's basically just how that information is made available and presented to us. That's the only thing that's changed. Okay. Now, obviously, one of the things that does come up, we mentioned earlier on about deferring potentially some audit time if need be, is kind of around site tours. Obviously, now I realise that it's not just about reviewing documentation. It shouldn't be that. An important part of any audit is undertaking, tours, talking to people, engaged in a particular process, or particularly when you're doing environmental or health and safety audit, seeing things happening operationally. Okay, so like it says there, for standards and any certifications that require a site tour or any specific process to be followed on the shop floor, so to speak, should try and allow the assessor around using a webcam or video call, obviously absolutely taking into consideration health and safety and everything that needs to be taken into place. We're never going to ask anyone to do something that would, that would compromise that. But obviously, if it is a case of, like I say, I've undertaken site tours using WhatsApp, taking under Teams, and so on and so forth, when it's physical, like it was almost like a remote control auditee, if you like. It's worked reasonably well, and I know you can then point out particular areas you want to look at, and then you can have discussions on site with that person, and so on and so forth. So obviously, being as practical as possible. Now, obviously, some audits, we may defer audit time if it's an initial assessment or something like that, or reassessment, we may look to defer some audit time, but on the whole, we will look to undertake the audit remotely in its entirety where it's practical to do so. Okay, like it says there, if it's not possible due to technology, health and safety, or the closure of a particular location, or an activity is not happening, we can then allow that to be deferred for a period of time. But obviously that will come on a case-by-case basis. Our intention, for everyone's sake, is to keep the audits going ahead as planned, cover the ground that we need to. Otherwise, all it's doing is leaving potential kicking the can down the street, so to speak. So, okay, so the more we can get covered off the bat, the better for all of us. Okay. So it's also possible with some prior arrangement to capture relevant images as a recording before the audit. So there's nothing wrong with taking obviously pictures to illustrate a point or a process or something that you've undertaken, something that you've achieved, a change in process or work environment. Nothing wrong with that. Kind of I did an audit only the other day where an office had undertaken a refurb, and there was a dozen or so pictures just taken of various parts, so we could see how the infrastructure changed and how that may impact the management system. So yeah, pictures, absolutely no problem. Videos, they paint 1,000 words and even more. So having that as part of your audit evidence is absolutely fine. You can share that however you feel is best. Okay. So just a few key points, and just to kind of run through, finish off, and preparing for a remote audit then. Okay, so engage early with the management to outline and agree any changes. This is kind of something that we would make sure that we do, make sure that we're understanding, what changes has happened within the organization, how you've reacted to the situation. Understand the level of paper versus electronic based evidence. Okay, now that's something to consider, because obviously if you're in an organization where you're potentially kind of hard copy or paper based evidence, does that need to be scanned in? You don't want to be spending the day scanning in, to get evidence over to an auditor, because it delays, it causes a bit of a backlog in the system. So if you know there's evidence that's going to need to be scanned in, for an example, get that in place so that you can just present it straight off the bat as soon as possible. Okay. Keep on top of document requests. Absolutely, a top tip there. Obviously, when you're working remotely, if there's information requests come in from the auditor, just write a list. Say to the auditor, can you send me a list of what you need, and we can work through it. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Okay. And like I said, ad hoc kind of desk interviews may not be possible. Okay, so whereas obviously if people are working within an organisation from various remote locations, like I said earlier, it's not going to be simple enough or simple to kind of just walk over to their desk or walk to the purchasing department or walk to calibration. They're going to need to know kind of exactly who's going to be made available and when. So make sure you get those times scheduled in. Okay. Point there may not be entirely relevant, but I have come across it. I've undertaken, believe it or not, some remote audits for clients that I would normally go to in the States, and kind of 6 or 7 hours behind. So I had to factor in time zone differences. Obviously, it may not be entirely relevant in this instance, but if you've got international offices, then and people need to be made available for interview and so on, factor that in as well. Make sure you can consider what's in scope. We've all been through a change of this last 10, 11 months. So kind of what working practices have been affected and functions of the business. Make sure that they're reflected within your management system, and that the system's up to date to reflect the working practices that may or may not have changed as part of this whole pandemic process. Okay. And finally, kind of establish what can be audited effectively remotely. In-person visits may still be required. We've still got that contingency there if need be. So don't panic. If you feel there's something that's just not being, you're not going to be able to demonstrate effectively, we can have that conversation with you and work through it with you. Okay. So key to the whole process then is to develop a good audit plan. Okay. Now within the audit plan, you're more than within your rights, with NQA to kind of just request a detailed audit plan. Say, okay, what do you need to see and when? As part of our process, we're generating more detailed audit plans than we have previously, where we'll give indications to kind of the type of records that we may wish to see to illustrate part of the process. So if you need any further information on that, just come straight back to your auditor and ask and say, look, okay, can you tell me, can you explain, and so on. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Okay. So yes, absolutely, the process will give details on timings, kind of specific personnel on processes, and also as well, kind of the methods on how the information is going to be maintained. So it might be a case of in the morning, we'll just do the conference call. As the day goes by, we may use video streaming or sending of documents and so on. Whatever format suits you best, we will work along with you. Okay. So I think that's kind of very key there. That whole point is just making sure that the plan is there, everyone has agreed, you're happy with it, you're comfortable, you're happy with the way the day is going to go and the people that need to be available. Okay. So how has remote auditing changed things, apart from entirely, because it's something that we never did as an organisation or as an industry in the past up until kind of March of last year. It has had a big change. And I'll be honest with you, from my personal perspective, it obviously took a bit of getting used to at the beginning, but it's as time has gone on, I've become more and more used to it, more comfortable, more confident with it. I found that it's working very well. Clients like it. Some clients prefer it. They much prefer it. They're saying it's much more, kind of, I don't know. They're just really getting into this, saying it was a better audit. It's easier for them logistically and so on. So some of the things, so pros and cons there. Whatever way you look at it, it's obviously thoroughly testing the system. It does allow for a little bit more of an in-depth audit. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I had a conversation only yesterday with a client, and they said the audit I did back in May, June time, we said we actually got a lot more from it because you were able to focus on areas in a bit more depth, which is okay. Communication obviously is critical there. Some of the pros, it forces that level of communication, can lead to more creative questions, good planning, more effective planning, And yeah, ultimately, to some degree, less stress for the client. Obviously, you don't, if an auditor coming to site is causing a problem for you logistically, particularly from a health and safety perspective, it takes it out of the equation, whilst you're still obviously having your audit and keeping your certification in place. Okay. Cons then, obviously, okay, they're always going to be, with it, whatever way you slice it, there's potential cons there, including the potential to hide evidence and kind of be presented with a perfect audit pack. Okay, it's potential there. It might not get to engage with as many people as you like, or see the processes as clearly as you need to, or indeed technology failure. So all potentials there, but for my whole experience for this last 10 or 11 months, it's been far more pros than cons by a long shot. Absolutely. So just a little bit on use of ICT then. We spoke about it earlier, okay? Like we said earlier, just to kind of recap really, make sure you find a platform that works for you, okay? It doesn't need to be dictated by the certification body. It's whatever suits you as the auditee and the auditor best. So we'll work along with you. And there's a number of platforms, I think more than ever before, that we can work along with you, okay? More interactive platform is more effective, absolutely. One that allows for kind of, like I say, video cameras. I always turn my video camera on and leave it on for the duration as when I'm there, because it just makes it more human, the whole thing. Okay, found they're much more effective. Yes, when it comes to ICT testing, absolutely. Don't get to the day and find out that someone, still running Windows 98 or can't turn their webcam on. Have some dry runs, make sure that people are familiar with it, and even with your auditor, if you feel more comfortable, contact your certification body, NQA, and say, look, okay, can we just have a quick run through, make sure that it's working, make sure I know which buttons to press and so on. Saves time on the day. Okay. You might want to generate some work instructions and or even deliver a bit of training on the platform, just to make sure that it's people feel comfortable and familiar with it. Okay. And fundamentally, the platform needs to be effective in achieving objectives, which is undertaking a remote audit. Okay. So a couple of things now just to take into consideration when as part of preparing for an external audit. So obviously just to kind of just to some of these points down, crystallize some of these. Request a plan. Absolutely, as part of our process, we have to provide audit plans to our clients, which is absolutely fine. And like I said earlier, we're going into a bit more detail on those, so feel free to request that earlier than normal. Once you've received it, feel free to kind of ask any questions about the plan and move the plan around and so on. It's I always say to people, the running order of an audit isn't necessarily critical. To some degree, it's more kind of the coverage. So if things need to move around to accommodate, working from home, childcare, homeschool, and whatever it may be, that's fine. We'll work with you on that to make sure that we can obviously complete the audit, but not only complete the audit, but complete it effectively. That's what we're trying to achieve here for everyone. Yeah, confirm the auditee is required. So yeah, from your side of things, who needs to be available? Again, go back to the auditor. Say, look, who do you need to speak to? Kind of, you may have been through it dozens of times, but just confirm. Make sure everyone's available at the agreed times. Timing is critical, so there's not kind of lost time during the audit. Because if you've only got a one-day audit, for example, that soon runs away with you. So just try and be disciplined as you can with the timings side of it. Okay. Confirm the documentation evidence that's required. Again, make sure that kind of what's needed, be it soft copy, hard copy, and the means of transmittal. Just be prepared, basically. Confirm the communication platform. Absolutely, like I've already said. Test it. Nothing wrong with testing it. Okay, make sure everyone knows what's going on, and confirm internet connectivity and stability. So it's, I think, touch wood now. Don't want to tempt fate, but I've had no issues at all with internet stability, and it's like all of my audits have gone very well, and all the colleagues that I've spoken to have found that the process is working well. And Teams, like I say, is a particularly stable platform for that process. Part of the other thing we mentioned earlier on, just confirm any information security arrangements. Absolutely. Communicate with your team internally. So if there's, if you're running a quality management or management system team, make sure they're aware of, what's going on, when they need to be available. If you're all still working at your site offices, your offices, then that's absolutely fine. You can still communicate. But obviously, if you've got people dispersed over the country, that can prove a bit more of a headache. So make sure that communication is maintained. Confirm if the auditor wants to undertake a site tour, so you can make arrangements for that, and obviously confirm that it's been safe to do so, and so on. Also as well, nothing wrong with confirming arrangements if the visit cannot be completed for whatever reason. Okay, so if you're saying, well, okay, what are the contingencies here if we can't complete this, and how do we deal with that? Okay, be prepared to demonstrate how your system has been reviewed and updated, particularly to some degree with regards to kind of health and safety and environmental. There's going to be any number of changes, working practices, and so on that, you know, no doubt relatively significant over this this whole pandemic's caused to everyone. Okay, and be prepared also to explain the remote internal auditing arrangements. So if you're undertaking your internal audits remotely, you can obviously talk through that process as well and say, okay, because it's a big part of any management system is the internal audit process. So be prepared to kind of explain how you're kind of effectively monitoring your own management system from a remote perspective. Okay. So just a little bit now on internal audits. So we've spoken about kind of, you know, a remote audit in general and kind of externally and some of the things you can do to prepare for that and so on. Some obviously going to run through just some points now with regards to internal audits, some things to consider when it comes to your internal audits. Now, you can factor in all of the points we've just spoken about already so far this afternoon. But when it comes to your internal auditing and doing this remotely, yes, absolutely, factor in the points we've already spoken about. But some of the other things to consider. Okay, so what are you actually auditing? So make sure, you know, the scope is clear. Make sure, you know, you're clear on what your, you know, what the audit, the internal audit is intended to cover. Okay, so just make sure that, you know, you're familiar with, you know, what's needed there in terms of, you know, processes and clauses and so on. Okay, make sure obviously, you know, kind of whether it's going to be desktop or live, you know, whether you're going to do desktop review of documents or whether it's going to be live interaction. So same rules apply with an external side of things. Okay, so really just kind of obviously paperwork can demonstrate, you know, a whole deal, but there may be certainly interview and observation and live, you know, live seeing, if you like, is a much more effective way of auditing certain processes. Okay. So when you're auditing, yeah, checklist or improvement tools, you know, kind of absolutely nothing wrong with having checklists in place, same as you would with a real life audit, having, you know, kind of a checklist in place for things you want to cover. Little A memoirs, absolutely, same rules can apply as to kind of on-site auditing. Okay. Absolutely, same as with an external audit. Obviously, planning. Okay, it really is kind of key here to make sure that you're familiar, that it's clear what needs to be, what's going to need to be seen, who, and what departments, and so on, and the means of obtaining that information. Okay, so that's fundamental there. So communicate internally with your teams, with your workers, with your colleagues, and make sure they're familiar with what's expected of them, when, what kind of things they're going to need to present, and so on. Okay. As with everything, same with an audit plan. You may not generate your own internal audit plans, such from an external body, but obviously it's good practice to do so. It gives people a lot more kind of just an idea of, you know, there's no surprises to some degree. Okay. Just a quick example on your screen then. Again, like I say, you'll get copies of all this, but just a little an illustration of some of the kind of format that a plan is taking that we issue out to clients now. So one of my colleagues there, I used one of hers as an example, Judith. Okay, so fundamentally we're doing the same approach in terms of timings and the location, department, but you can see that we've added in kind of the method that we're potentially looking at using, and also indicative records that are required. So the idea is that this kind of information will come through to you, so you've got a much clearer idea and you can feel more confident in the process. Okay, this is the time, this is the area we're covering, this is how we're going to be engaging, and these are the kind of records that you want to see. So yeah, this is kind of an indication of the kind of plan that will come through to you as a client. Okay. So in terms of the general approach then, okay, just make sure everybody knows their role for the day and availability, just to push that home again, make sure that that's kind of fundamental, be prepared. Test the communication methods, you know, make sure that it's stable. Make sure the required knowledge is there for everyone, you know, external, internal, that side of things. Make sure they've got the ability to use the platform that you've chosen. Okay, and prepare the buy-in from the company. Okay, so the most important useful tools in the ISO standard. Okay, so basically getting that buy-in, kind of just explain to people what you're trying to achieve as part of your internal audit, obviously, and the ways and means you're trying to achieve it, and the objective of the whole thing. Okay. So down to the audit itself then. Okay, so The words and phrase, I'm sure you would have seen this in a number of times. Documented information appears 59 times in ISO 9001-2015 alone. Okay, so when you're auditing, need to ensure that we can meet the standard requirements by collecting and assessing the evidence. Okay, now not everything needs to be documented, so there still will be a huge role to play in terms of having undertaken interviews and observations. And I know from my side of things, I can you can get a lot more information out of a 10-15 minute conversation than reviewing all the documents in the world, because obviously when a document comes through, you review it in isolation. Sometimes it can be out of context, so always be prepared to take that that document, that evidence, back to a person and say, okay, can you explain give a bit of context to the whole thing. So that's the same for internal auditing, and indeed for your external audits as well. Make sure that people are prepared to kind of to explain their workings, if you like. Okay. And importantly, when I'm taking an internal audit, we mentioned earlier, make sure you take the breaks. It's it can be a long old day sitting behind the screen. An audit can be a long day anyway, but obviously behind a screen it can be even more so. So take the breaks, factor that in, take the lunch, be disciplined is very important. Okay, and that's the same for your external and internal as well. Like we said earlier, operationally can be one of the areas that causes a few problems potentially, or concerns, if you like, from a remote perspective, how it's actually going to be undertaken. Okay, so keeping it simple. Okay, you don't need to obviously overthink the whole thing. Just look at the means of how you're going to undertake the internal audit of the operational side of things. Now that can be a simple case of, like we said earlier, just having a video tour of the place. It can be going to talk to individuals that are working, obviously not whilst they're working, but say, okay, can I talk to those persons operating that process and so on? Because obviously, documentation won't be able to demonstrate all of the evidence. Okay, there's going to be some cases where it will need to be explained to be able to demonstrate someone's understanding of a process and so on and so forth. Get them to walk through and talk through the process that they're operating. Okay, so we realise obviously there's limitations on the amount, if you like, or requirement for documentation within a management system. So in those instances, and the same rules apply when you're internal auditing, make sure that you're prepared to have those conversations with the people as need be. Okay, because auditing operations is not just necessarily about seeing documentation; it's about having that and getting that a person's understanding of a process. Okay. Like it says there, can you demonstrate, from an internal side of things, that a process is in place and users know what it is? Can you see an example? So when you're auditing, don't just take the word for it. Get an understanding that person knows what they're talking about and that they're position in the process. Okay. What is the audit process which we adhere to? Okay, make sure you can see examples of compliance at random. So kind of don't just take a presented word for it. Kind of just don't be afraid to kind of ask for a challenge and request more information. Okay, so you can, rather than pre-prepared information, so to speak. Just make sure you can follow the process. Okay, so same rules apply when you're undertaking an internal audit remotely. You're following that process. Okay, so looking for a beginning to an end, and whatever that process may be, that's what you're looking to follow. You're looking for that evidence to work it through and just and get the information that you need. Okay. Fundamentally here, you're looking for that kind of that process whenever you're undertaking an internal audit, albeit remotely or on site. It's about following that process from beginning to end, making sure that the people in the various steps know what they're talking about, that you've got the information they need to see and demonstrate to you from an internal audit perspective. Okay, like we said at the beginning, the only real way this has changed is that is the means by which you're obtaining the information. Okay. So on to performance, a couple of last little things now to talk through. Performance evaluation. Okay, when it comes to performance evaluation, there's the part of the standard here is about documenting information to demonstrate that you're evaluating the effectiveness of management system. Okay, and one of the key things there is about management reviews and internal audits and any non-conformities. So like it's saying on the screen there, it's that they're key fundamental things that you'll be able to audit and demonstrate as part of your external audit. So make sure that information is to hand, that it's as up to date as it would be if it was in real life, and that it's demonstrable on the screen or via discussion. Okay. So what to take away? Okay, so make your life easy. Okay, if documents can be emailed over, request documents from an internal side of things, and give yourself time to review them. Okay, so nothing wrong with providing information to an auditor. beforehand, give them time to review and familiarise themselves with it. Okay, nothing wrong with that at all. Don't lose the art of conversation. Obviously, because it's remotely, sometimes it can be tempting to say, okay, send me some information and I'll have a look through it and I'll see you a bit later. There's no need to do that. Obviously, that is part of the process, but absolutely maintain the conversation during the audit, and engage, because an auditor may misunderstand something, they may misread something, and obviously you're part of the process to make sure that it's being understood and put your side of the argument, so to speak. Okay. Certainly, absolutely. Don't panic about the whole thing. It's unusual for everyone. It's unusual and to some degree kind of uncertain times. But obviously, there's no reason why remote audits, can't be effective. They've been working very well, and it's they're a good way of undertaking, getting us through this whole thing. And but yes, liaise with your auditor. Make sure that you understand. Make sure you feel comfortable. If there's any questions, get them out in the open. Have conversations, whatever it may be. And they'll make sure you've got information that you need to. Okay. And finally, obviously, just be aware of, like we said before, transmission of secured information. Make sure that it's going into the right place. And we won't hold any information locally our end. If something's sent over to us, we'll delete that off as part of the audit process once it's finished. Okay. So fundamentally, I mean, obviously, that's kind of, if you like, the nuts and bolts of what I wanted to talk about. I think kind of the key kind of takeaway from me from this whole kind of 11 months is that internal audits, they can be effective, and indeed they are. They can, I think the key thing to remember is to kind of is that planning, that communication, now be that internal or external. Make sure that people know what needs to be made available, who and when and so on, and the platform that you're going to use. And yeah, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid to leave your camera on. It's a nice way of doing it. It just keeps, like I say, face to face. We're human at the end of the day. So it's yeah, I mean, that's really kind of what I wanted to talk about just this afternoon with you. Hopefully, I do sincerely hope that's been of some value to some of the points that we've spoken about there. I will keep the whole thing open now. I'm going to look open for some the questions and answers now. Like I say, you will get a copy of the presentation and indeed the recording as well. And if there are any questions, you're more than welcome to come to your auditor or the account manager within NQA. Anyone there will be more than happy to answer your questions about the audit process and the remote side of things. So what I'll do now, I'll stay on the line. I'll stop talking, but I will start to answer the questions that I can see on the screen. So everyone, feel free to stay on for as long as you like, or until you see the questions answered. But failing that, like I say, thank you for joining. I hope that's been of value and of use to you. And keep safe, keep well, and see you, well, hopefully at some point in the future. Take care, everyone. Thank you.